Morning, good day. This is for the world changers like myself. This is being created right now by me on Zoom with the intention of having this live on YouTube. So, what's there is who are you? Who am I talking to today? I've been showing up and talking to the internet, talking to the world. I had the Jenna Michelle show for a period of time after my traumatic event. I radically aligned. Long story short, met my husband in a very God ordained divine orchestration kind of way, got married. And what are we at? 6, 7 months, 8 months later, working on launching what for me is a new platform, a new version of myself, I don't know exactly what to call it. All I know is I've got the Jenna Hurst podcast here on my YouTube channel. I have a small project I did called Project Projector that I did for a season, and I have left the ones that I enjoyed the most up. I did hide some that were just I was playing essentially. And that's been my embodiment this entire time. It is playing with reality, it's playing with what's here, it's playing with what is alive in me. It is play. And that's what shows up for me. Inside of that, I had a very traumatic experience that was not play for me. It was a very real reality that led to a near-death experience. I talk about that on the Jenna Michelle show and working on dancing in the space between what was a very traumatic event and what for me is the embodiment of what I'm out to do when it comes to changing the world. So I'm not going to get into my story today. All I just want you to know is I was radically aligned to a very traumatic experience that led to a near-death experience under the supervision of Lacey Fire Chief Steve Brooks. And I say that boldly and confidently today because I was trying to articulate that something didn't go the way it was. Essentially, someone made a big mistake. And inside of that big mistake, I wanted to talk to someone. And instead of them talking to me, they were afraid of me and put me in a protection order. So what was a very traumatic event that I was a victim to, I was then put in a protection order by the people who did it to me. And I had to face them for 6 weeks. I wasn't able to talk about it publicly. And much of what the platform of the Jen Michelle show became because I was religiously taken against my will. They have a whole backstory, essentially not going to get into it today because I get trauma hooked like nobody's business. And again, the Jenna Michelle show is for that. So I have that bucket. You can go check it out there. And I want to create more content for that one day. The Jenna Hurst show, the Jenna Hurst podcast, whatever's here, is for me the container of being the world changer that I am. And so I went through what was a very traumatic experience. Essentially, I had a medical emergency. The religious leaders, former religious leaders who hadn't been in my life since 2015, this was in 2022, perceived it as mental. And instead of getting medical treatment, I got mental treatment. And sadly, in mental treatment, they can lock you in a room and never tell you where you're at or what's happening to you. And when you don't sleep for 5 days with no information, in a case that says you're gravely disabled, a threat to yourself and everyone else, it does something to your psyche. Again, different conversation for a different day. Just want to set the context is that I had a very traumatic experience and it impacted me in a major way. Massive PTSD, 3 to 5, if not 10 panic attacks, PTSD attacks, collapsing to the ground, couldn't breathe, all day, every day. I mean, I still have it to this day, quite honestly. Forever and always altered because of that experience. And inside of what was for me experiencing that I was going to die before I did the whole experience with the near-death experience, having the come to Jesus moment of this is the end of my life. I stood in a box room with no information and said, this is so fucking good. I literally had for me what was jumping up and down best experience ever because what for me had been a 2-year 2020 to 2022 year journey, having that experience of becoming a nutritional therapy going to Landmark Forum, becoming a nutritional therapy practitioner, discovering polyvagal theory, getting diagnosed with ADHD, and spending very long amount of time creating my own path and methodology to regulate my nervous system because I had this theory that I have all this energy in my head. And what would happen if I grounded that into my root? Because I discovered the chakra system and it just made sense to me. I began to see the whole world in that way. Little did I know I was autistic at the time. I got diagnosed with ADHD and actually had so many people in my world, people who diagnose people with autism, people who serve people with autism come into my world and they're like, you're autistic. And I'm like, I'm not autistic. I don't look autistic. And so I wasn't autistic, I was ADHD. And now where I'm at now, I can see clearly what was there and what makes sense to me, and the math and mechanics of why I'm a finance major and why math makes sense to me. And how in many ways I've turned the language into math and an equation. And I don't know, something about words being spells and spelling. There's a lot I could say there. I want to keep coming back home to center and saying, I'm talking to you. You are a world changer. And I simply discovered radical alignment and have been walking in it for 2 years, knowing that everything I was manifesting was in alignment to my highest good. I'd been doing that for 2 years. In fact, about a week before this experience, I was in Melanie Ann Layer's container, was doing her cash program. And I was typing my little thing, and I'm like, I'm hired by source to bring heaven on earth here. Literally typing that up as my little submission to the program. And just over a week later, I'm in a psych box, having a nervous system experience. And I'm going to be dying inside of a psych box with a nervous system emergency. That's what I was experiencing. And do you know what it's like to create content on TikTok with 144,000 followers? I don't know, that number rings some bells for me. When you're living your life wanting the magic and miracle that is the nervous system to be common knowledge for everyone, because you believe that is the path to trauma-informed healing that actually heals the whole human, compared to the linguistic masturbation that is spiritual, religious, and psychological culture, where you get to be in your body and actually heal. Body Keeps the Score is a great book on this. And yes, I'm going to say radical language. I am going to rock your ego here. I'm going to rock your world. We're going to rock your world in many ways, because I'm going to be having conversations with so many people. Are you ready for your world to be rocked? Are you ready to rock the world with me? This is an invitation. I've been doing this alone for 2 years, and I am desperate to find anyone who wants to do this with me, because the mission at large is every single human. Every single human. That's who I'm after. And I've discovered that doesn't come by an easy path. I think there's some things Jesus has said that articulates that. And for me, I was raised religious programming. It's part of Mars Hill Church. If you look into it, I like to call it a fundamental religious cult, because it could collapse in a day. There's a podcast on it. You can go check it out, Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. So I like to refer to it as what it is, even though Mark Driscoll continues to preach at his Trinity Church down in Arizona today. What's tricky inside of that is I was raised in a religious context. I was hardcore Jesus, even though I struggled to preach and teach and tell people to do that. Except for me and my body, it was those who are gay, they're in sin. I just don't know what to do. Those who are this transgender, they're in trouble because they don't have Jesus. Those were my beliefs back in the day. And I have to live with that reality now. I have to live that I stood silent while my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, my fellow humanity, was tortured, abused, and treated in ways that essentially don't want them to be here. And as someone who's never been known for mental health issues, I was very close to my psychiatrist that diagnosed me with ADHD. ADHD is a well-being disorder. It can be found inside of the DSM. And I am working on writing my book called I Solved ADHD, because I believe it is a neurological nervous system thing. And if anything, I'll go out on a limb here to say is that I believe we're in a higher dimension. I believe we understand energy and we don't have language for it. So we can go a little crazy not knowing what to do, where the impossible and the important are what we're expected to do every day, and we just can't accept what's there. If you go to ADCA, which is what I went to, the coaching program for ADHD, there's a quote there that I got that said, those with ADHD can always do what they're authentically interested in. What's fascinating for me is pretty much anyone in my reality is diagnosed as ADHD. And if you do the research, you'll find that 50% of those with ADHD are also autistic. And so I desire for those of us who are autistic like myself, who could never be autistic, would begin to understand the full spectrum of being neurodivergent or neurology at that. And what my desire is to not demonize those who are neurotypical. We need people who work the 9 to 5. We need people who can just do it, who don't need interest or don't need dopamine or don't need these things. They can just do it. We need you. I want partnership with all humans. The challenge I have is currently neurotypicals definitely see us neurodivergence as lazy, bad, broken, and wrong because we don't operate like them. The challenge is when you put us together and you actually see what's here, we're far from broken and wrong. We are the Avengers. We are the guardians of the galaxy, whatever, galaxy, so to speak. I do struggle to say those words, is to be real. I struggle with anything that's woo, anything that's spiritual, anything that is aliens, or all of that. Because again, I had a very mystical experience. When you're going along in life and a message comes through you, and then you're taken into a psych box, and they can do it again against your will with never explaining, as they called the cops on me a second time 3 months later and threatened to take me a second time. Even though I'd been going to the doctor weekly, or my acupuncturist, who was a Western and Eastern doctor who I was going to 2-3 times a week, who I was talking to my psychologist, talking to my medical doctor. Essentially, I saw all of them, well, minus my Eastern Western doctor. I found her after. I saw my psychiatrist and my doctor a week before the medical procedure because I was doing a month-long detox. And I was trying to make sure everything was in good order. Like I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner. I've released high standards for my medical, mental, social health, all of it. I've been studying it for a long time. So I have an embodiment of well-being that's really high. And so when I have an energetic release, when I have an orgasm that kicks off the can't stop, which I later find is defined as Kundalini rising, or full Kundalini rising is the best language I've got. The challenge with that is there's a lot of psychosis that goes with it. And I didn't know that. And then you go to spiritual worlds and there's a whole thing there, which I'm not going to get into. You go to religious worlds and it's demons. So I've got kicked out of churches, which for me was a desperate cry and attempt for community, because Jesus is real to me. I've got kicked out of churches because that's the only definition I've got of what happened in me. When I look for the science and look for the data and look for my experience, that's where I find myself. Same with autism. And we don't have these experiences happening, and so I'm the crazy one. And I keep going. 2 years later, if not, it's the 22nd today, I got to see when VidCon was. Really, the big change and catalyst for me was manifesting a free trip to VidCon. Pure magic. I went with someone who, how do I want to say this, is the youngest person to graduate college. You can project your own neurotypical, neurodivergent lens on that. Youngest person to graduate college. I got to go to VidCon with them. They needed a chaperone to celebrate their college graduation. And so I spent a week with them. Spent a week in their energy. I then came home after doing a month-long detox, got my nervous system reset with someone who's autistic. So I just want to say I believe in radical alignment and divine alignment to a degree that I will surrender my life into. I got it clear, and I'm clear. I have surrendered into this fully, freely, never gonna give up my whole life into it. And where am I at? I'm at my husband's house. Manifested my husband, who in many ways is all the dreams I had for the 10 years I was in my prior marriage. It is wild to be religiously conditioned into a cult where I was struggling with marital issues at the time with someone who I was married to, which is a whole backstory that we're just not going to get into today. And I spent all this time praying to Jesus because the church told me that I can't get divorced because that's illegal sin, all that kind of stuff. So I'm literal autistic. I can't get divorced. I'll go to hell. And so since I can't get divorced, I am to treat Jesus like my husband. So I did that. I prayed, Jesus, you're my husband. Blah, blah, blah. Pray, 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 pray. And then to manifest my husband, who literally, we're on a conversation. He comes to visit me in Washington to help launch a program. He goes back home 3 days later, calls me. I called him and I shared a story with him. And he goes, are you my wife? And I go, yes. Like, as in, I didn't have the cognition or like the control. It just blurted out. And I was like, I just said that. Prior to this conversation on the phone, I was never getting married, never getting remarried. That was check, done. None of that. And for sure not government married. I got raked over the coals with that one. No, never again. Also, I've got a really big mission. I have a unique position and a unique outlook on life, and I say some radical things online, so I don't know anyone who wants to be with this. So I had very low standards for, well, not low expectations. After my radical experience, I had the experience if I'm married to Jesus. Because I got stuck in an orgasm and I wouldn't stop, and my consciousness was influenced by the world. And so the only way to keep my mind pure was to go to Jesus. And then it led to all these turns of events. I had a transgender chaplain come to my house. I had the religious leaders that came to my house. 4th of July, 2022, I wake up and I had this whole epiphany that it was Ascension Day. The heaven on earth is here and I ascended. Or maybe I didn't ascend and I'm on earth and I didn't make it into heaven. I woke up 4th of July, 2022 with that experience. I went through this whole thing, time stopped. I look at my computer. This is the morning after my channeled message that says, I know the word, that I'm power against principalities, and that I've done the work, and I've been limited, and have had many limitations. And that I've done the work. I finished the race. And really, like, I'm in my car, I have it on video for those that are deeply invested. I'm happy to share it with you. I'm like, I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it. They're like, why? It's a very mystical experience. And much of my life has been demonizing and shaming that experience. I can't deny it. It had it. I had it. We had it. Whatever we want to say, whatever words we want to use. My brain is buzzing, so you're welcome. I believe we are tuned in, tapped in, turned on, as Abraham Hicks would say it. I believe we are attuned to heaven on earth, as Paul Selig would say. Kingdom of heaven is here. We are in the upper room. I want to provide an attunement to this. It's actually reading Paul Selig's first book, I'm the Word. I'm reading this book and it's talking about someone essentially helping bring you into this higher dimension. I'm like, I want that. I want someone to help bring me into this higher dimension. I feel alone in this. I feel like I'm always doing it on my own. And yes, I do believe we can do it on our own. And what I want is to be a resource. I got a sneeze coming through. I want to be a resource. And here we go with the stimming. So what's there for me is I don't know what's happening right now. I'm just going to run with it and trust it. Thank you for being here. I did learn this one yesterday. There's a lady who does nervous system regulation and like energy, how you can read your own energy. And it was like this, and then you go like that. And so I don't know what that is. It just feels really good because I can start stimming and it won't stop. And I personally believe it's light codes, magic, if some would say. The challenge I have now with the trauma of going into a psych box and having religious leaders put me in a protection order, they use my content out of context. So I know I can be snipped down and removed out of context and be used against my will, quite honestly. Thanks be to Jesus, I'm no longer in Washington because that is where it was at, and it is still legal for a crisis responder to take you against your will if they perceive you as a threat. Which at the end of the day, I would have been happy if that would happen to me. I've said multiple times over, and I'll say multiple times again. I understand I was a medical and mental experience. I was perceived as mental for sure. I was not able to sleep. I was channeling content. I was having these epiphanies and awareness, and everything was making sense to me. I wasn't operating in the quote unquote normal mental construct. I was in my home. I was in my bed. I was eating and drinking and brushing my teeth and cleaning my house and doing all the grounding things I knew how. I spent 2 years through Real Life Full Life learning how to take all of this energy here and ground it into my root. I had so many practices. And in fact, you can go back and again, I documented it all on my phone, because the second that nerve went off and the whole thing happened in my body, I go, I think I'm a science experiment. The person doing the body work left the room. I had that energetic experience, which is normal to me. I didn't know that people don't know about it, nor did I know it was even anyone actually knew about it. I just, that's normal to me. It's always been real. Now I get to talk about it on the internet out loud publicly, because for some reason, as I say in my declaration, I'm stuck talking about my orgasms until someone takes me seriously. I wish I didn't have to talk about it out loud. I'm just going to be, thanks be to Jesus, I'm not the current viral meme that's going around of the hawk tui. So go look at her if you want to go sexualize or demonize someone. I'm a victim of circumstances, and in the spiritual community, you don't get to be a victim. I created this. I orchestrated this. I am the author of my kidnapping and torture, which, yes, I understand that's a big word to use. And if you go to the RCW in Washington and look up kidnapping, you will see that it says if someone interferes with a government agency, that is considered kidnapping. You can go look. I think it's 1E. You'll have to go look. I can try to link it down below here on YouTube. So don't use it loosely. And as my former husband, who is the sheriff's deputy detective, however you want to call it, when I explained what happened to him, A, he's my former husband, so hashtag science. B, he essentially told me to not worry about Steve. And C said, yes, it does fit that. You'll need to do X, Y, and Z to essentially prove that. And I tried X, Y, and Z. And I'm autistic with massive trauma. So I got a nervous system and a brain, an limbic system, and a PTSD response any single time I talk to someone, because the second I open my mouth, the challenge is it doesn't really stop. This is my experience of being autistic. I'm stuck responding to what people say to me, and this was actually, quite honestly, the trap that I had in my house. We watched you run away from Jesus, so I'm left responding to that with a 6-2 sacral generator open throat. So it's gate 56, non-linear. It's how I speak. It's what makes sense to me, and I didn't know it was illegal. And I was essentially having what could be perceived as a heart attack. And because I was in a space of not being able to sleep, having the medical emergency that I was having, I'm now seen as mental and treated as such. Again, I would have loved to be taken by the crisis responders, because I would have known what was happening to my body and I would have responded in kind. In fact, when the crisis responder was talking to me, I said, "You're not listening to me. You're not listening. You're not listening to me." There's something really magical about the number 3, and when you say things in 3. Essentially, I said it in 3, and people behind me said, "She's listening to you." I was like, okay, maybe I misunderstand what's happening. And they put me into Steve Brooks's vehicle, which I'll add context because it's just coming out and this needs to get out. He was a religious leader over me from 2008 to 2015 when the collapse of Mars Hill happened. There's a long backstory of essentially use and abuse around marital coaching. I do want to add this just for completion so I can be done. I went to college at Western Washington University. I was in a 4-year relationship, wasn't the best, ended up leaving due to physical assault that I experienced from this person. I broke it off, obviously, and the next person I ended up dating was my former husband. We headed off really fast. This is my junior year of college. We essentially date long distance for a year through my senior year. And then I move in with him. And we ended up getting our own house, and we had this whole experience of essentially breaking up every month. After we got married, I discovered I have PMDD and have a very dramatic or depressed or irritable experience a week before my period. And thanks be to Jesus, with pursuing nutrition, that's not my battle anymore. I healed from that. I will take responsibility that when it was like I could handle all month of him not doing dishes, I finally would break and snap and get mad, upset, that kind of thing. So essentially, we would break up once a month. And I was at Edward Jones, becoming a financial advisor at the time. I went to college for finance, and I got a job at Edward Jones right out of college. And my field trainer was Felix Spagaro. And I'm in this constant, like, building my own financial advisor practice, having these essential coaching development, my field trainer training meetings. And he's got a tennis ball with Proverbs 21 something on it. And he proceeds to preach the gospel to me. I'd only gone to Jesus to like when I was struggling. He essentially says, if you want this relationship to work, you need to move out. You're in sin. And I was at the end of my rope. And I said, okay, full in. I'm trusting you, Felix. I'm trusting you what you say. I'm taking this Jesus thing seriously. So I moved out that day, moved back to my parents, and we broke up. I started going to Marcel. And before I moved out, I had tested Marcel, and I actually had my former husband go with me. And he instantly got mad at me and told me it was a cult. You know, a little bit of foresight right there. So either way, he says it's a cult. He gets upset, mad at me. That whole thing did not go well. I then proceed to double down and go to Mars Hill. I stay, get plugged in, connected, and I did the whole thing. I went all in. I then become single. No more of that relationship. I then discover someone new and start dating someone and I have to date this person. Now my ex at the time finds Jesus. He gets baptized and reaches out to me. He then starts attending the church I go to. I sit down with Lee and Steve and also Emily and Dave Vahey, and I am bawling. And I'm literally like, I'm trying to leave this relationship. I do not want him around. I do not want to be around him. And it was the Jesus thing to do, to forgive him and essentially allow him to be around me. And it was torture. He started playing in the band, he's playing bass, and everyone loved him. You can project your own identities there if you'd like. I can't stop you. And so I start offering, my service, and like the thing I did at church was offering, because an offering essentially was, or communion and offering, those together. I would hold communion at the front of the stage, so I didn't have to see him playing in the worship band, because I wanted a relationship with him. I just could not continue to be left every single month. And so I'm like, no. And I have letter upon letter. I would write letters back and forth, because that's actually what Lee and Steve told us to do. We couldn't be in personal conversation communication because our whole thing. And so essentially they told us we could write letters. So I have all the letters. And just, I don't trust you. I don't trust you. I don't trust you. And he pursued me for a year under the supervision and coaching and consulting and spiritual guidance of Lee and Steve Brooks. And so he tells me he wants to be with me, and I give him all the space and time to prove himself. And so we start dating again. It was like a year later. He ends up proposing, and I'm left with like, okay, we're going to get married, and this will make it so he doesn't want to leave me. We were engaged for 3 months, got married. A week later, he threatens to divorce me. He leaves the house, doesn't talk to me, stays with his mom, doesn't communicate. The church gets involved, does the counseling, all the things. And this cycle repeats on repeats on repeats. His mom recommended the book Codependency No More. We were told that you can't read books outside of the Bible. You can't go to counselors, because counselors will not essentially preach the Bible and Jesus. And I was all in. Again, I wanted this relationship to work. I was all in on betting on Jesus. And I really thought they held all the codes and the keys. I abdicated my own divine responsibility to check myself. I didn't have a frame of reference. I didn't know that existed, and codependency was out the roof. The challenge is that his mom went through multiple divorces and recommended the book Codependent No More. That would have been a great book to read at the point in time. Because the thing is, I've discovered to love Jesus, it is to be in a codependent relationship. if not a narcissistic codependent relationship where you're bad and wrong and broken and you need me to survive. And so I personally will say that both my former husband and I were victim of circumstances. I truly believe we wanted the best, we did the best that we could. I have no animosity against him. Yes, I would have loved to have been honored, respected, and protected against him, and who knows what would have happened if that happened. Inside of that, I did discover myself deeply, intimately, and there's a whole thing that I got to have a really intimate relationship with Jesus that led me here today. I did spend 10 years in a very, very, very lonely and depressing relationship, if you want to look at it that way, except I knew how to hold the hope, hold the line, hold the hope, hold the line, like, keep doing that, doing all the Jesus stuff, gaslighting my reality. And it wasn't until 2020 when I went to Landmark Forum, I was sitting there listening to it, and I had this experience of God had given me a Rubik's Cube, and they spoke, and it was like, I found that in the Bible, I found that in the Bible, I found that in the Bible. Everything made sense, everything added up. It literally made sense to me. And so all this process of deconstructing started happening. And that's what I believe they saw me run away from Jesus online as I was deconstructing publicly. The thing is, they hadn't been in my life since 2015. Yes, I saw them every once in a while because our paths still crossed at times. I still had love and care for them. No, didn't trust them with the 10-foot pole or whatever you want to call. No trust. I did respect and love them, as for a season of time, they were like family to me. Much of like any family that I wouldn't personally trust, I still love. They were like family to me. And so when that's 2015, that's when I ended that. In 2022, they showed up at my house. I will say they did come to my house in 2019 when I was having essentially medical emergency. I had a procedure done for endometriosis, ended up having adenomyosis, and I was having a very, very intense chemical reaction to the medication. I was massively sedated. They had to call 911, and I wasn't breathing because I was essentially over medicated. I'm hypersensitive. I'm autistic. Like, you essentially my the doctor I went to was like, you literally like take a baby Adderall amount, like when you take Adderall, when I had done it for a season to regulate my nervous system, very pro medication, I take the baby amount. And so I'm highly sensitive, and they gave me all these narcotics, and essentially they had to call 911 and possibly Narcan me, is the thought or fear that my sister and former husband had. And when they didn't know what to do, they had them come over, and I wasn't really involved. I just knew that. Again, former husband, law enforcement, Steve Brooks, fire chief. I don't personally have a relationship with him. In 2015, he comes to my house. No, 2022, he comes to my house and essentially is standing next to the crisis responder. And I truly believed that I was going to be getting medical treatment. I'm taken into his vehicle, not the crisis responder, take her into his vehicle. His vehicle takes me to a mental health facility, which I didn't know. I thought it was a doctor's office. I had never been to this mental health facility. I totally perceived it as a doctor's office. I'm in a really excitable state. You can perceive and project on that all you want. I'm jumping up and down and saying, I solved ADHD. That's what I'm saying. They're like, okay, you need to calm down. I was like, okay. So I go and sit down. Crisis responder, male crisis responder to my right is talking to me about how he's going to follow me on TikTok. Lee is standing over me and saying, one time she wrote a dissertation on wisdom. Yeah, I did. Because there's a point in time she told me I couldn't read any books. I could only read the Bible. And so I did a dissertation on wisdom. My mom comes over and tells me, Steve's friend has a room for you. And I was like, cool, I don't care. I need to sleep. I can't sleep. I can't stop having these epiphanies. I need to sleep. I don't care. Just put me wherever. I'm taken by Lee and Steve and put in an ambulance. And I go, where are we going? They said the emergency department. That makes sense. They hook my arm at the medicated or the ambulance. They hook my arm or this arm. And look over the lady and I'm like, why are we running? She physically runs me. I turn a corner and the door behind me locks and I instantly go, oh no, this isn't good. I don't know what's happening. They asked me to take off all of my clothes and pee in a cup, and I had new clothes on. And I remember I had a chakra bracelet on, which was helping me ground, and they asked me to take it. And I was so devastated. I was like, I'm gonna have nothing. And so I have 5 minutes left, so I want to trust the timing of this, and it might be a part 2. So either way, I take my clothes off, change my clothes, pee in the cup. I'm gonna trust and go all in, and I'm gonna say this is part 1. I'm gonna stop this and do the part 2, as I really don't want the limitation of time. I really want to get this all out for you. So this is where we are up until essentially the box, and we'll see what comes through next. Peace, love, happiness. Thank you for watching. Link down below for the next episode.